You are flying in the dark. The weather is brutal. Suddenly, your alternator dies. Your battery drains. In a fraction of a second, your million-dollar computer screens go completely black. You are trapped. This is steam gauges versus glass cockpits, why old-school needles are actually safer. For 20 years, the industry has sold you on the glass cockpit. They want you staring at screens and following a magenta line. But they forgot one terrifying truth. Computers crash, code fails, microchips burn out. But a vacuum-driven mechanical gyro does not care about your electrical fire. It relies on the brute force physical momentum of spinning brass. It is an unstoppable machine that has brought American pilots home through the worst storms of the last century. When the lights go out, what do you want staring back at you? A dead piece of glass or a heavy metal needle pointing the way home? There's a reason pilots fall for glass. Step into a modern cockpit and it feels like sitting at the helm of a starship. The panels glow with synthetic blue sky and a digital horizon, even when the world outside is pitch black and howling. Magenta lines snake across a color-coded map, promising certainty and order with every pixel. Synthetic vision paints mountains and rivers you can't see, while traffic and weather icons dance at the edges. Every number you could want, airspeed, altitude, engine temperatures, fuel flow, floats in crystal clarity, sorted and stacked by clever software. A single glance gives you the illusion of total command. This is the seduction of the glass cockpit. It's not just technology, it's comfort, control, and a kind of digital reassurance. The industry has chased this dream hard. Over 90% of new general aviation aircraft roll out with glass panels as standard. The promise is simple: more data, more safety, more peace of mind. Even a cautious old hand can't deny the appeal of seeing the world rendered in high definition, every risk highlighted in red, every path home traced in neon magenta. But as the data streams in, something subtle happens. Each new alert, each menu, each customizable display lulls you into trusting the system. The screens become your world, and you start to manage information instead of flying the airplane. There's a comfort here, yes, but it's brittle. A comfort that depends on electrons, code, and the silent hope that nothing essential ever blinks out. The glass offers a beautiful illusion of safety, right up until the moment the current stops flowing. Every digital promise inside a glass cockpit hangs by a single thread: electricity. Trace the path from alternator to battery, then on through the main bus, and you find a chain that must never break. But it does, far more often than manufacturers care to admit. The moment an alternator falters, the system leans on the battery, drawing down every amp to keep those screens alive. There is no drama at first, maybe a low voltage warning, maybe a flicker, but the countdown has started. Glass panels demand a continuous 28 volts to feed their processors and displays. Lose the alternator, and the battery becomes a sand timer. When the last electrons run out, the entire digital world vanishes. Not a gradual fade, just sudden darkness. No attitude, no airspeed, no heading. The cockpit's heart stops beating. This isn't theoretical. Air France 447, a state-of-the-art Airbus, lost its pitot sensors to ice at 35,000 feet. The computers, robbed of raw data, began feeding the pilots false numbers, computed by algorithms that no longer matched reality. The result was confusion, then tragedy. The final report from the BEA spelled it out. When the sensors failed, the glass displays became a hall of mirrors, not a window to the truth. In general aviation, the same vulnerability lurks. One broken wire, one spent battery, and the glass cockpit's certainty collapses. The pilot is left staring at blank screens, forced to remember what real flight feels like. When electrons fail, only spinning brass and ram air remain. That is not nostalgia, that is survival engineering. Pull the faceplate off a classic attitude indicator, and the truth sits right there in your palm. A dense brass rotor, nearly 2 pounds of metal, machined to a razor balance. This is no circuit board. The heart of the instrument is a spinning mass, locked inside jeweled bearings, driven by nothing more than air itself. Engine suction pulls a steady vacuum, 20, sometimes 30 inches of mercury, through a web of vanes and filters, channeling invisible force to the gyro's edge. When the engine runs, the pump whirls and the rotor comes alive, racing to 10,000 revolutions per minute. The sound is a low, steady whine, a kind of mechanical heartbeat. At that speed, momentum isn't theoretical. It's real, physical, stubborn. Newton's first law, spinning in a cage. The rotor's axis resists any tilt or turn, anchoring itself to the horizon with a force you can feel through the case. No software, no calibration routine, no startup chime. Just mass, inertia, and gravity, locked together by the laws of motion. The vacuum doesn't care about voltage spikes or tripped breakers. As long as the engine breathes, the gyro spins, and the world outside is mirrored inside perfectly. Even when the engine dies, the rotor doesn't quit. Pull the power, and that brass disc keeps spinning. Its stored kinetic energy bleeding off in slow, deliberate minutes, 15, sometimes 20, depending on the bearings and the last bit of suction. There's no sudden blackout. The horizon line drifts only when physics finally lets go. This is why old warbirds limped home through flak and fire, why B-17s and DC-3s kept their wings level after every fuse blew. The gyro didn't care about the chaos in the wires. It knew the horizon because it was bound to it, physically, by its own spinning mass. In a world obsessed with digital precision, it's easy to forget what real reliability looks like. But when the lights go out and the screens fade to black, the only thing left between you and the void is a chunk of brass, spinning furiously, holding the truth steady until you're home. Numbers have no loyalty. They do not care about nostalgia or the glow of a new display. They just tally what works, what fails, and how often you pay the price. The Federal Aviation Administration Service. Difficulty reports, stretching from 2020 through 2025, tell a story that is as blunt as a hammer. For every vacuum pump failure logged in general aviation, nearly 4 EFIS or AHRS events show up. That is not a statistical blip. That is a pattern that runs straight through the heart of the digital promise. The cost ledger is just as unforgiving. Replacing a vacuum pump, engine-driven, cast in metal, with carbon vanes that wear on a schedule, sets you back about $400 to $800. A full six-pack of mechanical instruments, installed and ready to fly, lands in the $5,000 range. Compare that to a dual screen glass cockpit retrofit, and you are staring down a bill of more than $25,000, not counting the backup batteries and software updates that creep in every few years. Maintenance on the old gear is measured in hundreds, not thousands. Failures come slow, predictable, and mechanical. A pump loses suction, a bearing grinds down. You feel it in the controls or see it in the suction gauge long before you are flying blind. No sudden drop into darkness, no silent algorithmic collapse. The glass side of the ledger looks modern, but the numbers behind it are brittle. An EFIS can go dark from a single bus failure, a battery that drains unnoticed, or a glitch in the circuitry that no technician can see without a laptop. These are not theoretical events. The agency's own bar chart stacks the failures in cold columns. EFIS and AHRS reports outnumber vacuum pump failures by a factor of 4. That is not a knock on progress. It is a warning about what progress sometimes forgets. When the numbers are this stark, faith in electrons starts to look like a luxury, not a survival plan. In the end, the math is as physical as the machines themselves. Brass, inertia, and air pressure do not blink. They do not care about software cycles or firmware versions. When you are counting on a system to keep you alive, you want the odds and the physics stacked in your favor. Numbers don't care about nostalgia, and they don't care about marketing. In the simulator, the truth comes out in cold, hard percentages. When pilots are dropped into a glass cockpit and forced to manage a partial panel failure, one screen goes dead, then two, then the synthetic vision flickers. Workload climbs by 25%. That's not a guess. It's measured, logged, and charted, a rise in cognitive strain as the pilot's eyes dart between menus, tapes, pop-up alerts, and backup displays, hunting for the one piece of data that matters. Instead of flying the airplane, you are chasing ghosts in the software. FAA analysts have watched this play out frame by frame, eye-tracking cameras mapping every saccade. The pattern is always the same. The scan breaks down, fixation sets in, and the pilot starts to manage the system instead of the flight path. In the old six-pack, the scan is a rhythm, a loop between airspeed, attitude, altimeter, heading, the vertical speed indicator, and turn. The needles give you trends, not just numbers. You see the horizon slip before you feel it in your gut. But glass demands interpretation. Every piece of data is wrapped in color, context, and a layer of abstraction. The result is more mental gymnastics, more time spent deciphering, less time flying. The numbers sharpen when you look at proficiency. In controlled studies, pilots flying glass panels in degraded modes saw a 30% drop in accuracy, holding altitude, keeping heading, and managing pitch. That's not just a slip. That's a loss of the very skills that keep you alive when the world outside goes gray. The magenta line promises certainty, but it breeds dependence. When the line vanishes, so does the confidence. One FAA human factors analyst put it bluntly: glass makes system managers, steam makes pilots. In the heat of a crisis, the difference is not academic. It is the difference between wrestling with a menu tree and grabbing hold of kinetic truth. Brass needles do not ask you to interpret. They show you the answer, anchored to the laws of inertia and air pressure, not to a line of code. When the workload spikes and the scan fragments, the old six-pack stands steady, unblinking, unambiguous, and brutally clear about what matters most. The alternator is pulled and the battery's slow decline begins. Voltage drops, minute by minute, each number on the overlay a silent warning. At 7 minutes, the cockpit's glass displays vanish, one after another. Darkness settles in. No digital attitude, no heading, no synthetic horizon. Only the sound of air and the faint vibration of mechanical life remain. This is no simulation. ACFII commands the controls, with a safety pilot beside him as the test unfolds. The voltage telemetry is unforgiving, 24.2 volts, then nothing. The last screen blinks out. The digital world is gone, leaving the aircraft seemingly blind. But the old six-pack endures. The vacuum-driven attitude gyro, spinning at 10,000 RPM, keeps its horizon bar steady long after the electrons have faded. 20 minutes past blackout, it still holds true, locked to the real world by inertia and suction. The airspeed indicator, fed by pitot pressure, remains honest, giving readings in knots, not guesses. The altimeter, too, ticks on, measuring the world outside, untouched by the loss of power. Even as silence fills the cockpit, these needles keep pointing home. This isn't hypothetical. Flight test data backs every moment, proven in FAA-approved demonstrations. The alternator is pulled at cruise. The battery voltage curve is captured in real time, screens fading to black at 7 minutes, yet the vacuum gyro holds the horizon for over 20 minutes. The pilot flies partial panel, holding heading and altitude by reference to spinning brass and moving air. There is a spike of workload, adrenaline, and muscle memory, the old scan returning, but then the rhythm settles. In instrument meteorological conditions, with nothing outside but blankness, survival depends on a 2-pound rotor and the honesty of a pressure gauge. The NTSB docket for ERA 22FA 147 documents. What happens when this chain fails? Glass goes dark, alternator out, battery drained, screens blank. The pilot, left with no backup scan, loses control. Confusion, then silence. No muscle memory for brass, no analog rescue. For those trained on fundamentals, blackout is a test, not a trap. Analog instruments ignore voltage and code. They answer only to motion and air. When the chips go dark, the gyro keeps spinning. That is not nostalgia, it is survival, proven every time electrons fail. Survival isn't an accident. It's built on habits, checks, and a willingness to trust the physical world over digital promises. Start with your hands, run them along the vacuum lines, feel for cracks, loose fittings, or the oily grit that means a leak. Every 500 hours, the vacuum pump earns a close inspection. Don't wait for the red light or the sluggish gyro. Pull the pump, check the vanes, and replace before the bearings grind to dust. The air filter isn't just a footnote. Change it on schedule. A clogged filter chokes the pump, starves the gyros, and leaves you with nothing but hope. Move to the pitot tube. It's not just a stub of metal, it's your lifeline to airspeed. Heat it before every flight, even on warm days. Ice doesn't care about seasons, and a cold pitot is a silent killer. Run the pre-flight checks by the book. Suction gauge in the green, gyro spin up smooth, attitude bar steady as the engine idles. Don't trust the screen alone, watch the needle settle. In training, demand partial panel work until it's muscle memory. Cover the glass, fly the needles, and make the scan a reflex. If you're flying IMC, insist on a hybrid panel. Don't let anyone talk you out of a backup attitude indicator, preferably one that spins on vacuum, not electrons. The checklist isn't just paperwork, it's the difference between managing a crisis and surviving one. Physics never lies. Trust the brass, the vacuum, and your own scan. That's how you get home when the electrons quit. Momentum in aviation isn't driven by nostalgia, it's shaped by numbers and the stories written in maintenance logs. The FAA projects that by 2030, 70% of general aviation cockpits will be hybrid, digital displays for versatility and mechanical backups for certainty. This shift isn't about clinging to the past. It's a response to what owners have seen in the field and what their budgets demand. A vacuum pump, that stubborn chunk of steel, costs $400, maybe double if luck runs out. Redundancy with electrical systems, backup alternators, batteries, and complex wiring pushes past $5,000 before a single screen lights up. Physics favors the tangible. When the power fades, a gyro keeps spinning, holding the horizon steady, immune to software glitches and firmware updates. Across the country, shops are retrofitting panels, reintroducing analog needles beside the latest glass, not as a step backward, but as a safeguard. As one veteran pilot put it, momentum can't be patched like software. A gyro spins by physics, not volts. Hybrid panels aren't a compromise. They're the next step, where proven mechanics and digital innovation share the cockpit. Right now, pilots trust microchips to conjure the sky from code until the electrons quit. But brass, spinning mass, and pressurized air never lie. They answer to physics, not firmware. In the end, survival isn't about sophistication, it's about connection to the raw forces outside your hull. When everything else goes dark, inertia and vacuum are still alive. That's not nostalgia, that's the last line. Share your thoughts below.